to another edition of the Michigan Lacrosse Review. My name is Greg Norman, your host. We are lucky enough today to have with us one of the great lacrosse administrators of the sport, Brian Silcott, former NLL and MLL player, former All-American at Nazareth College, member of the USA Lacrosse Executive Board, and more importantly, right now, he is the PLL's Director of Player Experience. Brian's going to talk to us a little bit about the recently announced schedule with the PLL and ESPN and what that means to the sport, and then certainly what it means to the PLL. A little bit about the PLL Hall of Fame. We are currently doing a number of interviews with the recently announced PLL Hall of Fame, and he's going to talk a little bit about lacrosse in Jamaica. He's involved in that process as well. I think you'll find this to be a really interesting interview. So we appreciate you being aboard. Brian will be back with us in just a second.
Welcome back to another edition of the Michigan Lacrosse Review. My name is Greg Norman, your host. We are so fortunate today to have not only recent news, as in probably a few hours ago. We're talking with Brian Silcott, who is the head of the Player Experience and Lacrosse Administration for the PLL. Brian, first of all, thank you for taking the time to talk to us. It's been terrific, and I appreciate that.
Oh, absolutely, my pleasure. Always happy to talk about lacrosse and more specifically the PLL.
I want to just briefly touch on two things. ESPN announced today, which is the 23rd of March, if I'm not mistaken.
That you're correct.
That you guys are going to be a partner with ESPN, having been with NBC last couple of years. So I know you've probably been in some conversations. Just kind of briefly tell us what that means for the PLL.
Well, it's exciting for us. ESPN is, quite literally the worldwide leader in sports, and everyone refers to them as that for good reason. They bring us a number of things, from just the broadcast and getting our games out there to a wide audience, but then all the other things they do with their, the 24-hour news desk where people will be talking about lacrosse and all of the things that they publish about the sports that they cover. It just provides so many opportunities for us to spread the PLL, but also to spread lacrosse and get more eyes on our sport, and hopefully bring fans to our game in particular, but also more fans to the game of lacrosse in general, and show it at its highest form, that the best athletes in the world that play lacrosse play in our league. So giving that product to the world through ESPN is just a super exciting thing to have happening.
I have to ask you briefly, head of Player Experience and Lacrosse Administration, is that a fancy term for coach?
No, actually, that's one thing I don't do as coach.
Right.
Really, what my job is about is taking care of the players, and everything from their contracts and making sure that those are all done right, to also just fielding their issues, fielding their concerns, their problems, talking them through stuff, serving as a liaison between them and the league. I like to refer to my job as kind of really having two ends to it. I work for the league, and I am wholly responsible to the league, and the league pays me. But ultimately, I'm charged with really looking at everything through the player's eyes, and doing that both through my experiences, but also through talking with them directly and finding out what's going on, finding out what their concerns are, and then advocating for them with the league. And the great thing about it is that I think I have a good relationship with the players, so they do talk to me, but also have a great relationship with the league, and so they really listen, and work hard to correct things and fix things and change things to keep our players happy and really provide them the best experience possible.
What's the biggest plus and minus in that position?
I would say the biggest plus is that I get to talk to lacrosse players a lot.
Right.
As you know, it's a really good group of people. They're obviously great athletes, but we also have a ton of really, really good men playing our game, and just being able to talk to them, sometimes seriously, but also just casually, to maintain relationships and check in with them on what they're doing and what's going on outside of lacrosse with them, is just super, super rewarding, honestly. I would say the biggest negative is that, sometimes I just have to say no to them, that, we can't do that. There's just no way that can happen. And sometimes those conversations can be a little bit tough. But the upside to that is that they generally understand. And as long as, as long as I do my job and explain things well and offer them the why instead of just the no, we usually get to a pretty good place.
We were going to talk about the PLL later, but I thought since we're talking about it now, a couple of questions.
Yeah.
The traveling, and this is my words, but the traveling circus town to town is the way this has been approached. And obviously with the NLL and the MLL, both of which you have some experience in, but with the PLL and the NLL now sort of not overlapping each other and being able to share athletes a little bit, that certainly has to be a benefit, number one. But number two, I would think any contract with ESPN has to be with putting butts in seats or eyeballs on a TV. I think that's the most. I would think that would be the biggest point. Are they poised to do some things with? They just announced their schedule for the upcoming summer, and I guess my point is, you see an uptick in tickets because last year I think there was kind of a trailing off a little bit of ticket sales.
It's going to be interesting what happens with tickets this year. And just to go back to the beginning, it's funny that operationally, it sometimes feels a little bit like a traveling circus. We roll into town, unload trucks, and we don't set up a tent, but we pour into a stadium. The great thing is I don't think the product is a circus. In the end, the product is a well-oiled machine and really fantastic athletes playing. The goal is to get butts in seats, as well as eyes on TVs and phones and computers to watch the game. I think the butts in seat side, the COVID has been a tough bear to overcome, whether it was limits on how many you could have, people's concerns about going to stadiums. And that was definitely, really still lingering last year, as well as our ability to fully put on our show because, we had to keep our athletes away from the fans in the past. And some of the stuff we like to do with providing our fans direct access to our athletes, just we couldn't do it 2 years ago at all. And it was very limited last year. So I think that hopefully with, COVID maybe not being gone, but being something that we've kind of figured out how to manage it and how we can work with it and keep people safe, that we'll be in a much better situation this year in terms of getting people to come out to the games. We had some great crowds last year and some really fantastic crowds, but obviously we're always looking to improve that and move to the next level.
There been any serious talk, answer, don't answer, but has there been any serious talk about going back to a community-based program? So you maybe have a team in Boston, have a team in New York, that type of thing?
Yeah, and it's something that, that it's asked externally. People are constantly asking us, but it's even asked internally. And I not that long ago, asked Mike and Paul that kind of directly. And I think they gave me the best answer possible is that, we see that as something that could happen, but it's not something that's like a goal on our chart in terms of where we're trying to get. When the time to do that is there, we'll know, and it'll become obvious that it's time to move in that direction. But right now we're a tour and we have to focus on being a great tour. And probably at some point in time, it'll become obvious, like, okay, now's the right time to move into individual cities and change our model. But right now, this model's working pretty well. And the circus, as you called it, is we're getting really good at doing it. So we're happy with where we are, but that obviously lays out there at some point. It's just not something that we're targeting that we need to get there in any way, shape, or form.
When I use the term circus, I don't necessarily mean clowns. I necessarily mean high wire acts. Certainly skilled people work in circuses as well. I'm just saying that the traveling, we're involved in the wintertime with, a ski series that goes from ski resort to ski resort. So all of a sudden on a particular weekend, this large group of people descends on something and you kind of take over, and that's kind of part of that process. So I know the pros and cons of that ability because everybody internally, but all of a sudden now you're coming into a new community, from that standpoint. I certainly
absolutely
players experience. I'm guessing that they're happy to be playing, and the product is off the charts. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
And that's one of the things that we work hard at is because we are a traveling show to try to repeat that high quality experience for our players. It's partially, we need to do it for the fans and put on a great show, but we also want our players to have a great experience as we go from place to place and, to ensure there's good food, good hotels, and being in a different spot every time, it's potentially a little bit different every time. So maintaining that level is one of the things we work hard to do.
One just thing hit me in my brain. When you guys have conversations about marketing and retail and driving the dollar, is it aware that you're not football, basketball? And my point is, how big a niche can you build? And is that part of the formula for that success?
Obviously we're not football yet. We have a long way to go before we're the NFL. But that is the goal. That is the goal to be mentioned in that conversation. And I think we inch closer every day. And so everything we do, we need to do with an eye towards, okay, we can't just try to mimic what the NFL does. We can't just mimic what Major League Baseball does. We need to do it our way, but with an eye on moving closer to them all the time. And as you said, that's everything. That's about how we do merchandise. That's about how we sell our tickets. It's about how we market ourselves. Everything has to be done our way because we are different. We are a different entity than they are. And I think one of the things that's very obvious that we have done is what we do in social media. And that's really been driven by Paul and his expertise in that area, that we really, in that arena, we compete with the big boys, and in many ways, they're now starting to copy us a little bit. And some of the stuff that Paul and our media team have done, we're really a leader in that area. And it's allowed us, without the billions of dollars and the millions of fans, to create a great product and push it out in a very big way.
When you pick cities for the tour, there's always that complaint: you're not coming here, you're not going there. What's the sort of the process of figuring out where you go?
Honestly, it's an incredibly lengthy and thorough process. Like, I'm overwhelmed. I shouldn't say overwhelmed. I'm amazed by how thorough our event production team is in terms of looking at a number of different things. And it's everything from, what the arena experience is going to be for our fans. Can we sell tickets there? What's the experience going to be for our players? Are we going to a new market versus supporting existing markets in lacrosse? And in the end, it kind of trying to get a mix, of going to some new markets and getting into new places, but also making sure we take advantage of Baltimore, Long Island, Washington, D.C., upstate New York, the places where there's lots of lacrosse fans, making sure we go back there and put on a great show for those fans, but also trying to test the water in some new places as well. But then, as you said, it's also, you got to have the right stadium. You have to have the right stadium deal. You have to, work with the local folks around marketing and all of that. So all those pieces need to come together. One of the biggest off-season requests I get from our players is, what's the schedule? When's the schedule coming out? I want to plan my summer. And it's, we have to constantly explain to them, this is a long process. It takes a long time to nail all of these things down because we don't want to make mistakes. And obviously you're going to make a couple mistakes here and there, but you try to reduce them as much as possible by being as thorough as possible. And our team on that side is unbelievable, the amount of research that they put in, and data they use to really make good decisions about where we play.
I asked that question because I think of the commissioners that have run the LPGA staring down the PGA as an example.
Mm-hmm.
And every commissioner has a different approach to it. Sometimes they would sell the sexuality of the women. Sometimes they would sell the ability of the women. And they never seem to get the market share nor the TV contracts that the PGA gets. And the guy they got now is just selling the product based on its own merit. Come out and watch really good women play, golf. And they're finding their way because they're growing, which is something that hasn't happened in that organization. And when you're steering uphill, as the PLL is at a lot of sports, looking at, there's only a certain amount of, revenue dollars for advertising and, and sponsorships, that you're cutting yourself in. I just wondered if it looks like an uphill battle, or I guess you're saying if you're smart enough, you can find what's available.
No, but I think the example you just gave really holds true to what we do, that we can't pretend we're anyone else but ourselves, and you're saying that's what the LPGA has figured out, right? Let's just market what we are, and we're really good. This is a good product, and just stick with it. We don't have to say that we're men's golf. We're women's golf, right? And we don't have to say we're football or baseball. We're lacrosse. We believe in the product. We believe it's an incredible game, and that people, once they watch it, are going to enjoy it. And it's going to take time. This isn't something that just all of a sudden there's going to be 50,000 people watching lacrosse games. But the key is that we're committed to building and getting there, and building a little bit at a time, over and over, repeating what we do, constantly analyzing what we do to get better each year, with the goal and the belief that we will get there, and that there will be, stadiums with 20, 30, 40,000 people watching the games in time. We just got to stick to being lacrosse, being great at what we do, and putting on a good show every time.
I think if you think of the NCAA with the championships, they give a $20 ticket and 50,000 people show up. The next year they give a $75,000 ticket, $75 ticket, and in somewhere in the neighborhoods of about 20,000 show up, because price is a factor. It really is.
It's a delicate balance, and you have to be careful about what you do. Every move matters, and that's why one of the things we are is data driven. Like, without a doubt, behind all of the great highlights and the music and all of the stuff we do, behind all of that is a lot of analysis and data and analyzing things, and whether it's price points or what the stadium looks like, or what the in-house show needs to be, what kind of music we play, everything is constantly analyzed to try to produce the best product possible.
I asked the question, and it's open to discussion because there's some guys thinking at home you're throwing darts up against a wall on a map.
Yeah, it's the
it's
furthest thing. We could get the schedule done really quickly if
Right.
we could just do it that way. We'd announce it in October.
I think of back in the 70s, the band Bay City Rollers. How'd they get their name? They threw a dart and it hit Bay City.
Yep.
They thought it'd be cool that they'd already picked up, well, it would have been interesting if they had landed in Dubuque. It'd been the Dubuque Rollers instead of the Bay City Rollers. I get your point. Part of the reason we're talking with you is that you were the chairman, I believe the chairman of the PLL Hall of Fame committee, which was just announced for the third year.
Yes.
We've been fortunate enough to have Paul Canabini and Mark Millen on in that class already. And we're hoping to get some of the guys, J.J. O'Bear this next week and a number of other ones. Talk a little bit about chairing the committee. And then the follow-up to it is it's pretty cool for the PLL to honor those guys at a time in the sport when it was sort of going from that club process into the MLL, because the MLL hadn't really been established. And a lot of those guys were in that group. And part of that same question, as that was developing in those years, and you were part of that growth, there was a lot of guys playing pretty darn good lacrosse in 2003, 4, and 5 who were college stars in the 90s.
Absolutely. A lot there. Being the chair of the committee was awesome. And Paul asked me, I remember when Paul first approached me and said, we really want to do a Hall of Fame that honors professional lacrosse players in both the MLL and eventually the PLL. There'll obviously be guys coming in that are PLL players in the future, but really recognize the whole of field lacrosse and start honoring them with a Hall of Fame that's well deserved. So when he charged me with that right away, I was excited. And right away, of course, my mind started thinking about the list of guys that could potentially be in it. And we narrowed it down to, okay, for the first one, let's do basically a team, 3 attackmen, 3 middies, 3 defensemen, a face-off guy or specialist, I should say, and a goalie. So that was the way we first realized, okay, the first class will set that number. And then we reached out to our lacrosse advisory board to start getting nominations and people that they thought were the best candidates, while at the same time forming the broader committee that would ultimately vote on it. And so I was, literally going through my Rolodex and Googling and finding as many people as I could to consider for the committee, while the lacrosse advisory board was coming up with the actual names of the people to be considered. We got the list together and did the voting, and amazing. It was pretty clear who the favorites were. There's a couple of folks that I'm confident will be getting in probably next year that were really close this time. But when you're picking 3 attackmen, there's 3 Powells. There's and then when you have the 3 Powells, you also have 2 Gates and a John Grant Jr. And a Mark Millen. There's so many guys that were potential candidates for those spots. It was I think a tough choice in a lot of things, and like guys even called me up to have discussions about it before they voted, and to try to get me to lead them one way or another. What are we looking for? Are we looking for any kind of diversity across teams? Does it matter if I vote for all guys from one team? Like, just you vote for you think the most deserving people are, and it'll all turn out okay in the end. I think in the end it turned out great. I mean, if you go down that list of players, it's some amazing lacrosse players. They're all guys that I played against, and every single one of them was, someone you had to buckle up tightly and be ready to go to compete against. There's a couple in there that were particularly fierce competitors for me. J.J. O'Bear being one. Who I always tell folks the story that he's the guy that as I got older, because I was an old guy when the league started, that J.J. O'Bear was the one that made me realize I was no longer the best athlete on the field. There's dudes that are just faster and stronger than me at this point. It might be time to step aside.
Come to find out, we had a ski connection, and Jay's father was the stunt double in a Robert Redford movie on Downhill Racer. He was actually the guy that raced down the hill, and he's in the film
and that's
business
what their
anyway.
company is based, was originally based in was video of skiing.
We go back to that 6 degrees of separation. Everybody seems to know everybody. Phil Hubbard made a comment last week. Jesse Hubbard made a comment last week. Phil Hubbard, the great Michigan basketball player, who was also in my mind. At any rate, Jesse made the comment that you should really watch J.J. O'Bear play, because he's one of the few guys that play with a Viking helmet, His point was he was a competitor.
He was unbelievable to watch. Like he's one of my all-time favorite players, just in terms of the way he approached it. He was a midfielder. You know, like, and I've written a couple of times, like, we excuse him that he played a little attack while at UVA, because he was the pure midfielder. You know, he could play offense, he could play defense. He was going to beat everyone to ground balls. He was just amazing to watch play.
I've turned, since we've done these interviews with some of these guys, some of the kids have been in the room when I've interviewed a couple of the players, and the kids don't know who they are. Then they go back to YouTube and watch it. Does that hurt the growth of the sport, not knowing? And I say that because I can tell you the starting quarterback of the Detroit Lions from 1968, who's the starting shortstop, and I think that history is something that is important. Do you think that's a component, is to make it grow a little bit, to show what came before?
Yeah, well, I think that was part of the reason of this. We don't want Gary Gate to be forgotten. We don't want Casey Powell to be forgotten. You and I are never going to forget them, but the kids don't know, and they get fed so much through social media and through the internet that it's easy to slip off the back side if you weren't playing in that era, if you weren't around in that era. So by doing this and pushing their highlights forward and using our platform to bring all of them back to the top of kids' minds, I agree. I think it's important for the growth of the game. You have to have a history to grow, and these guys are the history of professional field lacrosse in the United States, and so it's important to put them out there and to show what they could do, because it's amazing. They were just incredible players.
I make a standard joke we just started high school season here in Michigan, and I always make the joke. I said, I'm an old guy, I'm 67. I said, I learned to play with the Indians, and kids will go home and say to their parents, "Oh, coach played with the Indians growing up." Well, not exactly, but they don't have any feel for the history. They think back maybe 15 years, and I think that sometimes is part of the process. So,
well, yeah, that's the other part of it that and the PLL is doing a good job of that, I think, as well, is continuing to teach the history, the real history of our game and where it came from. I think it was something that when we were playing, everyone just kind of knew. It was such a small group of people that were playing lacrosse that everyone knew about the Haudenosaunee and knew about where the sticks came from and the story of how the stick got its name and where the game originally came from. And that is slipping away the same way that lots of people that play basketball have no idea who Naismith was, and in lacrosse, we don't want it to slip away, though, right? We want to hold on to it. We want to hold on to that story because it is important to our game, and our game is different. Like, I truly believe that there is a spirituality about lacrosse, and there's something special about it.
I've said this 100 times, but a sport invented by Native Americans became a prep school sport. And you think of the journey with that, it's such a oxymoron in its process, but I think it's becoming, as it becomes more well-known across the regular folk, guys who are not a part of that. My wife works for the Pistons, and I could have told you every player on the 2004 championship team. I look at a roster now and don't have a clue. She works there. And my point to it is,
for the Pistons, you're saying?
Yeah, she's their travel director. And we go to games and sit in the front row, and it's like, who's those six new guys? I don't even know who they are. I didn't even know where they went to college. And I'm a pretty good consumer of sporting information. Yeah. And so I guess that's part of it, is we get it coming from so many directions that's part of it. Let me take you back briefly. You were an All-American at, I'm going to say this right, Nazareth.
Correct.
Nazareth College. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Westchester County, New York. Went to Fox Lane High School, which is like a combination of Mount Kisco, Bedford, Pound Ridge, about 45 minutes north of New York City.
Where did the stick come for the first time? Where'd you pick up lacrosse?
Sophomore year of high school. I love to tell this story. I was a baseball player, played center field on a team with good pitching. And from where we practiced baseball, you could see the guys practicing lacrosse, and standing out there in the middle of center field watching a pitcher throw the ball by the batters, I kind of looked at my buddies on the lacrosse field and thought, they look like they're having a lot more fun than me. So end of that season, I told the baseball coach, I'm done. I'm switching to lacrosse, and the rest is history.
Went to Nazareth, two-time All-American. You won a national championship there. Division III. Talk a little bit about then, 1990 to 93. I think you were in school. Am I correct?
Right. Yep.
It was Division III's always had some really good teams. I mean, there's always been, Denison, and you think of some of Limestone and Salisbury. You think of some of those programs, and that was certainly true of your university. You played really well. Did Division I ever come calling, or was it something you considered?
Yes, I had an interesting path. I actually started it at Cornell University with the intent of playing Division I lacrosse, but also playing Division I football and wrestling. And as you can probably guess, the grades suffered a little bit, and my parents promptly told me that they were not paying for me to get C's. So I then convinced them that Franklin and Marshall College would be a much better option, where they didn't have Division I football or lacrosse. It was only Division I in wrestling, and I somehow convinced them that would be a much better situation. That I could still play 3 sports, but it wasn't all Division I. C's again. So Nazareth was a school that only had lacrosse. So that was their willingness to go back to paying for college, that I was at a place where I wouldn't be tempted to play the other 2 and would just stick to one sport and get it done there. So I started out as a Division I athlete, but ended up at Naz and have no regrets about it whatsoever. And I truly believe, I mean, we were along with, at that point, Hobart, and probably just us in Hobart in '92, were really Division I lacrosse teams playing in Division III. I mean, if you look at Hobart's schedule from that year, they beat several Division I teams. They had like a 2-goal loss to Syracuse, a 1-goal loss to Virginia, and a 1-goal loss to Nazareth College in the national semifinals.
What'd you study?
At Cornell, I was supposed to be an engineer. At Franklin Marshall, I was a history major. At Nazareth College, I was a theater major.
Okay, so a junior or senior at Nazareth, you were a theater major. What did you think was gainful employment by the time you got to be 25?
I had no idea.
Okay.
I did have an idea. Like I wanted to act, honestly. Like I wanted to go and be an actor on Broadway. Was what I really thought I wanted to do. And lacrosse just kind of never let me pursue that, because as soon as I was done, I was playing in the NLL. Well, what was the MILL at that point, but the NLL. And loved it. And so I never really got around to doing auditions or even trying to do it. I had started coaching lacrosse, and lacrosse just kind of took over my life.
You mentioned wrestling and football. So I'm assuming that you have great, I mean, I've watched you on film, you've got great skill, but going into the NLL indoor game, I'm assuming that football background, that wrestling background helps a little bit of the transition, because it's not, as we've discussed on the show 100 times, it's not the same game.
No, it's very, very different. And when I went in, I told you the first box lacrosse game I ever saw, I was on the floor in front of 18,000 screaming fans in Buffalo. And when the game ended, I was kind of like, what the heck just happened? That was just absolute chaos. I have no idea what happened. I don't know if I played well. It was crazy. But being a football player and being a wrestler, just the physicality and the contact and everything, it definitely was a huge help, and without a doubt helped me be successful and be able to transition from one to the other.
Before the MLL got off the start, I think 2000 was their first barnstorming tour.
Correct. That summer,
So,
that summer.
in those 90s, were you playing someone with on the field lacrosse? Were you playing with some of the club guys?
Yeah, so I played really with Boston, the Boston group. We had a couple different names: Brian Boston, Commonwealth, we were called. But yeah, we had a great crew up there. A bunch of guys that played for the Boston Blazers in indoor were on the team. Really, really good crew. Tommy Carmian, Talmo, Billy Day was our goalie. It's a really, really good group.
Before you went north, did you realize that, I mean, you've been a field player and obviously a New York guy, but did you realize that the Canadian indoor game was as popular as it was?
No idea. I had no idea whatsoever. I really didn't find out. I found out about it really in college. We had a guy who was actually my roommate for a year, Cam Bomberry. He was from the Six Nations Res up in Ontario, and he was a box player, and he was actually the Minto Cup MVP while we were in college. So we got a really quick education on that there was this whole other game being played up in Canada, and even went up and watched games, and then started playing once in a while. But I really had no idea until I got to college that box even really existed.
So the transition, you come club into you started in the early days of the MLL. Am I correct?
Yeah, for the first year. Yep. Oh, the MILL?
Yeah.
Yes. That league started a little bit earlier. That league had been around for a little while by the time I played. But I played in the first year of the MLL.
Right.
I was playing.
Played 4 years with the Cannons. Am I correct?
First year was actually with the Bridgeport Barrage, and then 3 years with the Cannons.
Talk briefly just about how good the early days of the MLL was. I mean, they talk about how great the PLL is, and it is, but the MLL had, I mean, it was fun to watch.
Absolutely. I mean, it was a wild brand of lacrosse, and it was very much a free for all. I think the biggest difference between those days and now, it would probably be the conditioning of the athletes. Like, these guys are training much more now, but in terms of quality of lacrosse player, it was unbelievable back in the day. Like, and it was a much wider range of guys, because you had everyone who was still playing club kind of going out, and they were picking the best guys out of a much broader spectrum of players, I think, at that point. Whereas now it's largely younger guys. They're in ridiculous shape. So the game's faster now. The precision is more. They're in better shape. But back then it was different and a little bit crazier, I think.
Heard stories of guys going on trips out west for, say, 2 games, and they got X amount of dollars to play, and they got X amount of dollars to sit. And, coaches would literally play injured players, goalies, ahead of guys, so they didn't have to pay the bonus from the guy sitting behind them. It was the financial stuff in those early days was pretty.
We actually had the year in Bridgeport, to get another player, we had an attackman who actually was a attackman in college. He was playing midfield a little bit with us, but he was wearing a chest protector because we were limited on how many guys you could dress. So he was also our backup goalie.
That's the nature of sport. So
you weren't allowed the time to change. So,
right.
So you could be the backup goalie and play somewhere else, but there was, if the goalie got hurt, you weren't allowed any time for him to change. So we had to play with the chest protector on as a midfielder.
So the follow-up question to that is, when did you start looking at, you're involved in a bunch of advocacy, you're involved with obviously USA Lacrosse as a board member. We're going to talk a little bit about Jamaica and the lacrosse program for that. When did you figure out that advocacy was the direction you wanted to go? And when was the end of the lacrosse career and the start of the professional administrative lacrosse career?
Advocacy and working to help other people has kind of just always been a part of my life. In many ways, it's what my father did professionally for the entire time I was alive, either directly or indirectly. My mother as well. When she went back to work after raising us for 15, 18 years, whatever it was, she worked operating a women's shelter. So, working to help other people is just kind of a Silcott thing. It's like expected, I think, in our family.
Right.
And for me, I was lucky enough to be able to find ways to do it with lacrosse, whether it's working, helping Oakland lacrosse, or working with Jamaica, doing stuff with the Scotland guys on, helping different youth groups around the country. It's something I've been provided great opportunities to work with folks that need help, but also do it in something that I love and find tremendously rewarding.
You spent some time coaching too. You coached in San Francisco. Did you enjoy the coaching?
I do. I still love coaching. I'm actually coaching a high school team right now, just because I was missing being on the field. Like, it's so much fun to coach and feel a team. And that's one of the things that I don't get in the same way with the PLL, that I get to impact all these players and work with all these players, but I don't have my team. It's kind of a different thing to have a group that you're building and molding them into something. So I'm coaching again right now, just because I love doing it. I absolutely love being out in the field at practice, and actually like practice better than games, I think.
For speak briefly, Jamaica there's only probably 7 or 8, maybe 9 really good world teams, and everybody else who's trying to get to that level. We've had a couple of championships locally here. We had a 2006 world championships in London, Ontario. So anybody that was local would go up and drive. If you really look at some of the lower level world teams, it's like watching a small college play. It's not to the level. Where is Jamaica in that hierarchy? And do you see the world game growing a little bit because of the Olympics?
Yeah. So I think what you just mentioned, I think is a fundamental problem for lacrosse. That people don't enjoy and on a world scale, people don't enjoy something where the US and Canada are just beating up on everybody else, right? If we put a game in Germany, like, no one wants to go and watch their national team get beaten by 20 goals by the United States. It's just not a fun thing to do. So leveling that playing field and raising up some of those other countries is an important thing, I think, for the future of our game on an international level. And as I think the lower teams, you're being nice probably when you say they're like a small college. I mean, there's ones that where, you know, they're really struggling to catch and throw on the field. It's great that they're there. It's great that they're playing lacrosse, but you know, they literally don't have anyone on the team that's played lacrosse for more than 4 or 5 years in their lives. And so it's, you know, there's no way you're going to compete with the US, but you're also not going to compete with Jamaica for that matter either. The benefit we have in Jamaica or with the Jamaica team is that there's a lot of Jamaicans who live in the United States and grew up playing in the United States. So take our U21 team that will go to Ireland this year, for instance. Almost every player on that team, I could bring a team that was entirely US college players. We won't. We'll bring some folks from Jamaica as well, just to give them the experience of being part of it. But we'll field a team that, you know, we could put out a starting 10 that's all Division I lacrosse players. So I say that because I think that we're going to be in a very good position to be kind of the next country that's really, really competitive. Are we going to beat the United States? Probably not. But are we going to be able to be competitive with the Englands and the Japans and those countries that play really, really good lacrosse, but just aren't quite the US or Canada? I think we will be able to compete at that level, and even, you know, into the future, push some of the top teams that you're going to have to come out and play if you want to beat Jamaica.
If you just watch the Olympics, and if you look at the Russian hockey team, anybody that was in the Continental League, which is their NHL, could play for the country. Well, they had a roster of 22 guys, and 11 of them were from the United States, with no Russian connection other than playing in the Continental Hockey League. My point is, should the Jamaican team or anybody else, when you see the World Championships, they're, you know, if you look at Team Israel, they've got a great program. Everybody goes over for a couple of weeks and practices. Should you be a part of the nationality in which you play, or is it just the nature of the beast that you're trying to build a program?
I think I think you should have the nationality of where you play, and your passport determines your nationality. And our guys, they'll all have passports, like they're Jamaican citizens. So that, you know, you flip it around. Should Christian Pulisic be able to play for the U.S. national team,
right,
in soccer? Like we all say, yes,
right.
Of course, he's American. Yeah. Of course, he can play for us. Well, it's the same thing. My kids they're Jamaican. The fact that their parents wanted to be able to provide them a better education, so they brought them up to the United States to get a good education here and to go to school here. That doesn't mean they're less Jamaican than the kid living in Kingston. They just happen to live here.
I asked the question. I'm a Lake Placid guy, and prior to the Jamaican bobsled team in '84, it was not unusual to try to find really fast sprinters, probably from the mid '70s through the early '80s, for bobsledding, because they were just faster than the guys that were driving.
Yep.
So when the Jamaicans showed up with a bobsled team, while it may have been a novelty for a movie, it was a smart move because they were trying to be more athletic.
Right.
Made perfect sense. And I mean, is there any better sprinters that come out of Jamaica? My God.
Right. My wife, who is my direct connection to Jamaica, my wife's Jamaican.
Okay.
And
that's the connection.
She played lacrosse at Syracuse. And after graduation, she was fast. She was asked to join the U.S. bobsled program for that exact reason.
Same reason.
You outlined they were looking for, you know, big, strong, fast women, and that was my wife.
Yeah, I get that part. 2 quick ones. USL was USL. It's now USA Lacrosse. You're part of the board. You've been on the board since 2019. Long-term CEO Steve Stenerson has moved on to World Lacrosse, and they're kind of trying to find their way. Just talk briefly at what you think of the transition and where's it headed.
You know, from what I've seen, from where I sit, the transition looks like it's been, you know, change is never easy and never completely smooth. But I think it's been handled really, really well. I'm excited about Mark being there. You know, I'm a Steve Stenerson fan. I've known him a really, really long time. He's been, I mean, you can't put into words how much he has done for our game, not just in the United States, but on a world scale. And just, I mean, it's been Stenerson for forever. But I also, at the same time, you know, welcome the change and am excited about some of the things that are going on in USA Lacrosse and what the plans are for the future. I would say both USA Lacrosse and World Lacrosse as well. I think we have a lot of good leadership. Jim Scherer as the president, who's a wrestler, which I love wrestlers, is the president of World Lacrosse. So I think that we have some strong leadership, and that the future is bright for us. We still have a lot of work to do, as you know, as a sport, to really kind of make it. But I think the key is, in the interim, we provide a great product both for our fans, but also a great experience for the people that play the game. And I think that everyone has their eyes on those two things in a continuous way, while we also find ways to grow. And whether it's the Olympic development, it's the sixes game that makes it easier to play in different countries and in smaller countries, and all the work World Lacrosse is doing to grow the game internationally, both through funding and through direct support. And similarly in the United States, to find ways to get it into new communities, to try to raise the level, and by new communities, I mean more diverse communities, but also just new communities, places where the sport doesn't quite exist yet. I think the effort is there, and the proof will be in the pudding over the next 10 years where the sport goes. For a long time, we were the fastest growing sport, and we always talked about that. And it has kind of flatlined a little bit, that rapid increase has slowed down drastically. And I think that's for a number of reasons. But I think a big one is that it's not an easy sport to play. You can't just go out and run around and play lacrosse. You have to learn how to catch and throw with that stick. So I think that's been recognized by a lot of people. I've heard it talked about at board meetings that we need to put an emphasis on keeping these kids playing at the young age, because where we lose lots of them is very early on. If they get to 13 and they're still playing, they're now lacrosse players. A lot of them play for a year or two when they're young, and they don't get the stick thing yet. And they're like, this stinks. I can't even catch the ball. Why am I even doing this? And I think there is an emphasis on that to ensure we retain those kids. And that's going to be a big part of our growth going forward.
It's really hard to play hockey if you can't skate.
Exactly. It's very similar.
Yeah.
It's really, I've played hockey without being able to skate. It's really frustrating.
Yes, you can.
Because you don't feel like a good athlete, right? You don't feel like I know I'm a better athlete than that guy, but he's skating circles around me.
Well, the other part is that we get kids that can ski all the time in the wintertime. Then now you put predetermined places in the hill where they got to go around gates at speed.
It's a little different.
Oh my gosh, it's a whole different animal. And we get a lot of football players that come out think it's going to be a meat squad kind of deal. And they learn pretty quick that they try to light up the guy that's 5'8" as they line him up, that, he's around him, really fast.
Go on.
So, we try to point out the old days of hockey that if you hit me with if you were my teammate and you were running guys into the boards, I'm going to take you in the locker room and beat the snot out of you, because I didn't want to get run into the boards by the other guy. There was some self-policing within the sport, and I think that the meat squad guys are really far and few between now at the higher levels. The other thing I also think is that globally they're growing since 2010. We're about an 8% growth in this country. We're about 2% growth at this point. And that's really with some of the hotbeds pushing that number up a little bit. So you're right. We're absolutely flatline. And that's part of the process. So it'll be interesting. What do we have to do to keep the interest of these kids in the sport?
I think we have to make it fun. I hear people talk all the time about, kids aren't the same anymore. Kids aren't willing to work hard anymore. And my response to most people that say that is it the kids aren't willing to work hard, or you don't know how to get these kids to work hard? And I think that, if we look at it as, well, we've done it this way, if we just keep doing that, we'll get them there, we're going to fail. And we have to look at it as kids are not the same as they were when you and I were growing up. And so we can't treat them the same. We want them to play. We have to do things the right way that they're going to enjoy it. And they will work hard. Like I look at my high school team, and I don't treat them the way I would have treated a high school team when I first started coaching, 30 years ago, because they're different. But guess what? My kids work their asses off because I am able to address them in the right way and pull it out of them. And back in the day, the way you pulled it out of them was by kicking them in the ass. It might be a little bit different now, but what difference does it make what technique you need to use? It's the end result that matters. And so whether it's getting a young kid to keep playing, in the old day, it was, oh, don't be a quitter, you can't quit. And so you had to keep playing. Now it might be, we need to make it a little more fun so they want to keep playing and keep doing it. So I think it's finding those techniques that are going to engage them, and recognizing that the way we always did it isn't necessarily the best way for now. And just because it worked in the 80s and the 90s doesn't mean it's going to work in 2022 and 2023.
Making it fun is, I think, part of the battle. And if you can do that, then I think you get over the hump and try to keep kids engaged.
I agree 100%. 100%.
I'm remiss, but I need to ask. Behind you is one of the most iconic pictures in the history of sport.
Yeah.
I had a cousin that was on that team as a decathlete. My question to you, and answer again, don't answer. You were named as one of the top 50 Black players to ever play lacrosse. Should there be a separate team for Blacks or Native Americans? We certainly don't have I guess we have a white team. Should that be a conversation we're having in this age? Or should it be based on your abilities?
So should it be? No. Does it need to be? Perhaps. I think it's two different things.
That's fair.
Obviously, we have a separate team for the Haudenosaunee. They have a national team, so
right. No, I know that
they directly have a separate team. And I think what's happening, I assume you're talking about like Nations United,
yeah,
and that. So yeah, I think that's very necessary. I think it's necessary for several reasons. That the natural way things tend to occur is you build things with the people that you're most familiar with and comfortable with. And some folks would look at it as, if you go into a town and all the kids on the team are white and there's no Black kids on that select team, that they're probably racist. And I avoid like saying that, because I don't think that's necessarily true. They're just doing what naturally happened, and their closest neighbors were other white kids, and they pull them together, make a team, and they go and play. And so I think it's important because of that dynamic, and also because there is some intentional racism as well, that folks are willing to say, okay, we're going to build a team where we're going to put an emphasis on pulling together minorities and people of color. And the Nations United teams are not all Black teams. There are white kids that play with them as well, which
Sure.
I think is a really cool dynamic also. The white kids are like, that's going to be cool to play in. It's going to be me and 20 Black kids, which was kind of the opposite of my experience throughout my lacrosse. It was always me and 20 white kids. So I think it serves a tremendous purpose. And I think the other side of it is that there's, a fair number of Black kids where it's an uncomfortable situation. I think it's very difficult for white people to understand what it's like to be the only, and it's been my entire life in lacrosse and football and like every team I was ever on. And it very much became the norm for me. But for the kids that were pulling out from more Black neighborhoods, Black urban settings, it's an odd thing for them to go and now be the only Black kid on the team and have no one else with even remotely similar cultural experiences. And the example my wife and I have been talking about a lot. My wife is the head coach at Howard University now, obviously historically Black university. And everyone, now that she's recruiting, every coach, points out the Black kids to her, and everyone just assumes, well, of course you're going to recruit all the Black kids, because it'd be really weird for a great white lacrosse player to go to Howard. Why would you? But yet no one would think it was weird for a great Black lacrosse player to go to Harvard,
right,
which is a historically white school. So there is still that dynamic. And the reality is, for those Black kids and the kids that she recruits, for a lot of them, they love the fact that they're now not the only. They're on a team with 15, 18 other Black girls with far more similar experiences, far more shared experiences. And in the end, we want everyone to be together. We want everyone to unite and everything to be wonderful. And we're one big happy rainbow, colorful flowers, rainbows, donuts, champagne. Everything's just wonderful. That's just not reality. And so for a Black kid to have an experience of being able to be himself, being able to be fully comfortable in his skin where he is, Nations United provides that for a group of kids. And that's just kind of, given the nature of our sport, provided over and over again for white kids, because that's the way the teams generally are. So yes, I think it's unfortunate that we still need to do that to provide those type of experiences, but I do think it is still needed right now.
Well, listen, I don't want to take up any more time. I appreciate you talking to us. Wow, this is really fun. It was a great interview, and you're obviously on top of I still think that there's every college league, the NCAA, the Big Ten should have somebody for player development. I think would be the term we used to use was odd budsman. You remember that term?
Oh yeah.
Who took care of a lot of different things.
Yep.
You know, had the power to get stuff done when maybe it didn't fit it fell between the cracks. And I think I think the colleges would do really well in coming up with a position, much like what you're doing now for the PLL.
I agree. I think, having an advocate for the players is an important thing, and one that's directly connected to in the college administration and in our case, the executive staff. It has tremendous value, and it pays dividends every day. It pays off for us in the PLL, having that connection and giving people love and letting them feel heard is an important thing in the world.
Brian, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. Enjoyed the conversation.
Just wanted to thank Brian Silcott for coming aboard the Michigan Lacrosse Review. We've hopefully learned quite a bit about the PLL and its process and how they work, a little bit about the PLL Hall of Fame, and just about lacrosse in general. Great guy. It was a wonderful interview, and we appreciate his time. So we'll see you next week with another interview from the Michigan Lacrosse Review. I'm your host, Greg Norman.